Commander Sarah Chen stood at attention in the pristine white chamber of the Galactic Council's administrative complex. The air hummed with the soft vibration of anti-grav generators, and holographic displays cast pale blue light across the curved walls. Around her, representatives from 12 different species sat in elevated pods, their alien forms creating an intimidating semicircle above her position on the central platform. The Zephyrian High Counselor, a being that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a tree, floated in the center pod. Its translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as it spoke through a universal translator. Commander Chen of the Terran Defense Force, you have been summoned to receive new orders from the Council. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. She had expected this moment for weeks, ever since her last mission report had reached the Council chambers. The liberation of Kepler 442b hadn't gone according to their carefully laid plans, and bureaucrats never liked it when field commanders made decisions that actually worked instead of following protocols. That would have gotten people killed. The Council has reviewed your recent actions on Kepler 442b, the Zephyrian continued, its voice carrying the mechanical tone of the translator. Your decision to engage the Vorthan occupation forces directly, rather than following the approved evacuation protocol, has been deemed problematic. The word hung in the air like a weapon. Sarah had heard it before, directed at other human commanders who had the audacity to think for themselves, instead of blindly following orders issued by beings who had never set foot on a battlefield. A crystalline representative, its body resembling living diamond, chimed in with a sound like breaking glass. The approved plan called for a strategic withdrawal to minimize casualties among all parties. Your aggressive action resulted in the complete destruction of the Vorthan fleet. It also saved 40,000 colonists who would have been executed if we had followed the withdrawal protocol, Sarah replied, her voice steady. The Vorthans weren't there to relocate the humans. They were there to eliminate them. The insectoid delegate from the Mantari Collective clicked its mandibles in what Sarah knew was disapproval. The intelligence report suggested negotiation was still possible. Your premature attack closed all diplomatic channels, Sarah almost laughed. In her 12 years of service with the Terran Defense Force, she had seen this pattern repeat itself countless times. The Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, always believed that every conflict could be resolved through careful diplomacy and measured responses. They lived in a universe of committee meetings and consensus building, where every decision was filtered through layers of bureaucracy until it emerged as a compromise that satisfied no one and protected nothing. Humans, on the other hand, had learned hard lessons about the cost of appeasement. Earth's history was filled with examples of what happened when good people stood by and watched evil unfold, hoping that reasonable discussion would somehow change the minds of those who had already chosen violence. When the Vorthans had surrounded Kepler 442b with a blockade fleet and demanded the relocation of all human settlers, Sarah had seen the writing on the wall. She had also seen the mass graves they had left behind on 3 previous worlds. The Vorthans have never honored a negotiated settlement with human colonies, she said, meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. Every relocation has ended in mass executions. Every temporary occupation has become permanent slavery. I made a judgment call based on established patterns of behavior. The aquatic representative from Naraya, speaking through a water-filled chamber, sent ripples across its liquid medium as it communicated. Your judgment call resulted in the deaths of 12,000 Vorthan military personnel. The Council cannot condone such disproportionate responses. There it was. The fundamental difference that had caused friction between humanity and the Council since Earth had joined the galactic community 30 years ago. To the Council, the lives of the aggressors and the victims held equal weight. To humans, there was a clear moral distinction between those who chose violence and those who suffered from it. Those 12,000 Vorthan soldiers were actively participating in what would have been genocide, Sarah said. They made their choice when they blockaded a peaceful colony world. The Zephyrians' bioluminescent patterns shifted to deeper shades of blue, indicating what Sarah had learned to recognize as frustration. This attitude is precisely why the Council has decided that human military commanders require better integration into galactic peacekeeping standards. You are being reassigned, Commander Chen. The words hit like a physical blow, though Sarah managed to keep her expression unchanged. Reassignment was the Council's preferred method of dealing with human officers who showed too much initiative. They would be moved to desk jobs, training positions, or diplomatic roles where their aggressive tendencies could be properly channeled into more acceptable pursuits. You will report to the Administrative Training Center on Proxima Station, the Crystalline delegate announced. There you will undergo reorientation in proper conflict resolution techniques and galactic diplomatic protocols. Upon successful completion of the program, you will be assigned to a position more suited to your talents. Sarah had seen good officers disappear into the Administrative Training Center. Some emerged months later as hollow shells of their former selves, their fighting spirit replaced by an obsession with proper procedures and risk avoidance. Others simply resigned their commissions rather than endure the systematic dismantling of everything that had made them effective leaders. The Mantari delegate leaned forward in its pod. The transport will depart tomorrow at 800 station time. You are dismissed, Commander. As Sarah saluted and turned to leave, she could feel the weight of their collective gaze on her back. They thought they had solved another problem, neutralized another troublesome human who refused to fit neatly into their vision of galactic harmony. They believed that with proper training and attitude adjustment, she could be transformed into the kind of officer who would follow orders without question, who would sacrifice human lives on the altar of diplomatic propriety. Walking through the corridors of the administrative complex, Sarah passed holographic displays showing news feeds from across the galaxy, reports of Vorthan peacekeeping operations on other worlds, crystalline mining disputes that somehow always resulted in the displacement of smaller species, Mantari trade agreements that bore a suspicious resemblance to protection rackets. The Council's version of galactic peace looked remarkably like organized exploitation with a bureaucratic smile. As she reached her quarters, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would not report to the transport tomorrow morning. She would not submit to reorientation and emerge as a neutered version of herself. If the Council wanted to reassign her, they would have to catch her first, and Commander Sarah Chen had no intention of being caught. The cargo bay of the merchant vessel Wandering Star smelled of exotic spices and recycled air. Sarah crouched behind a stack of shipping containers from Rigel 7, her military uniform replaced by the rough clothing of a freelance engineer. The fake identification chip in her pocket identified her as Maria Santos, a propulsion specialist looking for work in the Outer Rim territories. 24 hours had passed since she failed to report for transport to Proxima Station. By now, the Council would have issued alerts to every security station in the core systems. Sarah Chen, decorated war hero and respected commander, was officially a fugitive from galactic justice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent 12 years protecting the very civilization that now hunted her, fighting to defend colonies and trade routes that kept the galactic economy functioning. But the moment she refused to submit to their attempt at mental conditioning, she became an enemy of the state. Captain Torak, a grizzled Centaurian with cybernetic implants covering half his face, emerged from behind a stack of grain shipments. His species had joined the galactic community around the same time as humanity, though they had been more willing to adapt to Council expectations. Most Centaurians now served in approved roles as traders, technicians, and low-level administrators. Maria Santos, he said, reading from a handheld scanner. Says here you've got experience with quantum drives and plasma conduits. Sarah nodded, grateful for the forged credentials that Lieutenant Martinez from Intelligence had provided during their last mission together. 15 years of experience, mostly on military vessels and commercial haulers. I can handle anything from basic maintenance to complete overhauls. Torak studied her with eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. Military experience, you said? Which service? It was a dangerous question. Sarah's file was probably being circulated to every ship captain in the merchant fleet by now. But Torak's expression suggested curiosity rather than suspicion, and she decided to take a calculated risk. Terran Defense Force, she said. Served on cruisers and destroyers, mostly in the outer colonies. Got tired of the politics and decided to go independent. The Centaurian's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on her. Politics can be a real pain in the exhaust port. The Council's been cracking down on everyone lately, not just humans. My cousin got reassigned to a mining platform for asking too many questions about the Vorthan trade agreements. Sarah felt a spark of hope. If resentment toward the Council was spreading beyond humanity, perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The Vorthans seemed to get favorable treatment from the bureaucrats. Favorable treatment? Torak snorted. They get whatever they want. My ship got detained for 3 days last month, while council inspectors went through every manifest and cargo pod. Meanwhile, a Vorthan war fleet passed through the same checkpoint without even slowing down. He gestured toward the ship's main corridor. Come on, let me show you to the engine room. Fair warning, though. We're not heading anywhere the council considers safe and civilized. This route takes us through the outer spiral, where the bureaucrats don't have much influence. As they walked through the narrow corridors of the merchant vessel, Sarah noticed the diverse crew. A pair of aquatic engineers worked on life support systems, their environmental suits allowing them to function in the ship's oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. A young human woman, barely out of her teens, monitored communications equipment that looked suspiciously advanced for a simple cargo hauler. You run a tight ship, Sarah observed. Have to, out here, Torak replied. The Outer Rim isn't council territory anymore, not really. Local warlords, pirate clans, and independent colonies have carved up most of the space beyond the Veil Nebula. Some of them are decent enough to deal with, others. He shrugged. That's why I keep my crew armed and my engines running hot. They reached the engine room where massive quantum drives hummed with barely contained energy. Sarah recognized the configuration immediately. These were military-grade systems, far more powerful than anything a merchant vessel should possess. Either Captain Torak had very good connections in the black market, or he had a more interesting background than his identification papers suggested. Nice setup, she said, running her hand along one of the primary conduits. These drives could push a ship this size to nearly military speeds. Torak's expression became carefully neutral. Previous owner was in a hurry to sell. Didn't ask too many questions about provenance. Sarah understood. The galaxy was full of ships with questionable histories, crewed by people who had reasons to avoid council scrutiny. Some were criminals, but others were simply individuals who refused to accept the increasingly restrictive nature of galactic civilization. The outer spiral had become a refuge for anyone who valued freedom over security. What's the destination? She asked. Blackwater Station in the Kepler Void. Independent mining operation that needs supplies and doesn't ask awkward questions about documentation. Torak paused, studying her reaction. Of course, if you're having second thoughts about working beyond council space, now would be the time to say so. Sarah looked around the engine room, thinking about her options. She could try to find another ship, one heading back toward civilized space where she might be able to disappear into the general population. But that would mean spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for council security to catch up with her. It would mean abandoning everything she had fought for, accepting defeat without even trying to fight back. Or she could take this journey into the unknown, where the council's authority grew weaker with every light year, where humans and other species who refused to submit to bureaucratic control were building something new, something that might offer hope for those who still believed in the values that had made humanity strong. I've already burned my bridges with the council, she said finally. Blackwater Station sounds like exactly where I need to be. The Centaurian's scarred face broke into a grin. Good, we launch in 1 hour. Fair warning, though. The route to Kepler Void takes us through some contested space. Pirates mostly, but there are rumors of Vorthan raiding parties operating in that sector. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. After weeks of feeling helpless, trapped by bureaucratic machinations she couldn't fight, the prospect of actual combat was almost welcome. How good is your tactical officer? Decent enough for merchant work, Torak admitted. But I get the feeling you might have some experience in that area too. Some, Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. If we run into trouble, I'd be happy to assist. As they prepared for departure, Sarah watched through a viewport as the lights of the administrative complex grew smaller in the distance. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, the council was probably convening emergency sessions to discuss the problem of human defiance. They would implement new protocols, assign more oversight officers, and pat themselves on the back for their measured response to this minor crisis. But they had made a fundamental error in judgment. They had assumed that Sarah Chen would react like the politician they wanted her to become, rather than the warrior she had always been. They had expected surrender, and instead they had created an enemy who understood their weaknesses better than they understood her strengths. The quantum drives engaged with a subsonic rumble that Sarah felt in her bones. The wandering star pulled away from the station and set course for the jump point that would take them beyond the reach of Council authority. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely. The real fight was just beginning. The Kepler void stretched endlessly in all directions, a region of space where dying stars cast their final light across fields of cosmic debris. Blackwater Station hung in the darkness like a metallic spiderweb, its modular construction spreading outward from a central hub in a pattern that spoke of organic growth rather than planned design. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the wandering star as Captain Torak guided them toward the docking facilities. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, she could see the controlled chaos of an independent frontier settlement. Ships of every conceivable design clustered around the station's loading bays, sleek Centaurian traders, bulky human cargo haulers, and strange angular vessels from species she didn't recognize. "Welcome to the end of civilization," Torak said, joining her at the viewport. Blackwater's been operating for about 15 years now, ever since the Vorthons claimed the mining rights to everything within 50 light-years of Council space. The folks who run this place figured there was still money to be made in the void, if you weren't too picky about following regulations. A communication came through the ship's speakers, delivered in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Wandering Star, this is Blackwater Control. You're cleared for docking Bay 7. Welcome to the void and try not to shoot anything that shoots back." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Friendly place." "They have to be," Torak explained as he maneuvered toward their assigned bay. "Out here, cooperation is the difference between survival and becoming another piece of cosmic debris. But that doesn't mean they trust easily. Everyone who ends up in the void has a story, and most of those stories involve running from something." The docking process completed with the solid thunk of magnetic clamps engaging. Sarah gathered her meager possessions, the clothes on her back, a toolkit that Martinez had included with her false identity, and a military-grade sidearm hidden in a concealed holster. Everything else from her old life had been left behind when she chose defiance over submission. Blackwater Station's interior was a maze of converted cargo modules and improvised corridors. The air carried the tang of recycled atmosphere mixed with the ozone smell of active plasma conduits. Gravity was lighter than standard, probably to save power, and Sarah had to adjust her stride to avoid bouncing off the deck plating with each step. The main hub was a vast spherical chamber where dozens of different species mingled in what appeared to be organized chaos. Traders haggled over manifest displays, technicians argued about equipment specifications, and information brokers whispered in shadowy alcoves. At the center of it all, a massive holographic display showed the current status of mining operations throughout the void. "Maria Santos?" A voice behind her made Sarah turn. The speaker was a tall woman with the pale complexion and enhanced musculature of someone raised in low gravity. Her clothing was practical but well-maintained, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "That's me," Sarah replied, studying the newcomer carefully. "Elena Vasquez, station administrator. Captain Torak sent word that you might be looking for work." Elena's eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as she evaluated Sarah. "We always need skilled engineers out here. But I have to ask, what brings a former TDF officer to the void?" The question was direct and potentially dangerous. Sarah had to decide how much truth to reveal to someone she had just met. But something in Elena's manner suggested that lies would be detected and appreciated even less than uncomfortable truths. "Disagreement with council policy," Sarah said carefully. "They wanted to reassign me to a position where I'd do less thinking and more following orders. I chose to resign rather than accept the transfer." Elena nodded slowly. "The council's been tightening the leash on everyone lately, not just humans. We've had 3 ship crews defect to independent status in the past month alone." She gestured toward the holographic display. "But out here, we judge people by what they can do, not what some bureaucrat thinks they should do." "Interested in seeing our operation?" They took a transport pod to one of the outer rings, where the station's primary mining coordination center was located. Through the transparent walls of the pod, Sarah could see mining ships coming and going from the asteroids that drifted through the void. Each ship was different, customized by its crew for specific types of extraction work. "The void is rich in rare minerals," Elena explained as they traveled. "Quantum crystals, processed matter from stellar collapse, exotic elements that don't occur naturally in normal space. The Council classified most of this region as too dangerous for commercial development, which means they left it for people like us. The Coordination Center was a marvel of improvised efficiency. Multiple screens showed the real-time positions of mining teams, cargo shipments, and potential hazards. A diverse crew of operators managed the flow of information with the practiced ease of professionals who had learned to work together. Despite their different backgrounds and species, the beauty of independence, Elena continued, is that we can respond to opportunities without waiting for committee approval. When a new deposit is discovered, our teams can be on site and extracting within hours, not months. Sarah was impressed despite herself. How do you handle security? The void must attract its share of pirates and raiders. Elena's expression grew serious. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. We've been having increasing problems with organized attacks on our mining operations. Not random piracy. Coordinated strikes that suggest military planning and intelligence gathering. They reached a conference room where several other station personnel were waiting. Sarah recognized the mix of species that seemed common in independent settlements. Humans, centaurians, a few aquatics in environmental suits, and what appeared to be a modified synthetic being of unknown origin. This is Commander Chen, Elena announced, causing Sarah to stiffen at the use of her real rank. Sorry, Maria, but we do our homework out here. Your service record with the TDF is exactly what we need right now. The synthetic being, its crystalline face reflecting the room's lights, spoke in a voice like chiming bells. The attack patterns suggest Fourthan tactics, but the raiders are using ships and equipment from multiple sources. Someone is coordinating them, providing intelligence about our operations. Sarah studied the tactical displays they showed her. The attacks were indeed professional, targeting the most valuable mining sites and avoiding areas where resistance would be strongest. But there were patterns that spoke of something more than simple profit motive. These aren't random raids, she said finally. Someone is trying to disrupt your entire operation, not just steal cargo. The targets are chosen for maximum economic impact, not maximum immediate profit. A human technician, young enough to be Sarah's daughter, leaned forward eagerly. That's what we thought too. But who would want to shut down independent mining in the void? The answer came to Sarah with the clarity of tactical insight honed by years of military experience. The Council, or more specifically, whoever benefits from maintaining the Council's monopoly on rare mineral extraction. Elena nodded grimly. The Vorthons have been expanding their mining operations in Council space. If they could eliminate independent competition in the void, they could control the supply of exotic materials throughout the galaxy. So what do you want from me? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Help us fight back, Elena said simply. We have good people and decent equipment, but we need someone with real military experience to coordinate our defenses. Someone who understands how to turn a collection of independent miners into an effective fighting force. Sarah looked around the room at the faces watching her expectantly. These were people who had chosen freedom over security, who had built something worthwhile in the dangerous emptiness of the void. They were asking her to help them defend not just their livelihood, but their way of life. For the first time since leaving the Council station, Sarah felt like she had found where she belonged. Not following orders handed down by distant bureaucrats, but working with people who shared her values and respected her judgment. When do we start? She asked. Elena smiled. How about right now? We have 3 mining teams that need escort protection, and intelligence suggests another attack is imminent. Sarah stood, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But this time it felt different. This time, she was fighting for people who had chosen her, rather than superiors who merely tolerated her. Let's go protect what's ours, she said. The modified mining vessel Iron Duchess cut through the void with deadly purpose, her civilian hull plates concealing military-grade weapon systems and enhanced shields. Sarah stood on the bridge, watching sensor displays that showed 3 distinct raider formations closing on Blackwater's outer mining sites. Contact bearing 27 Mark 15, reported Jensen, the young human technician who had proven surprisingly adept at tactical operations. 6 ships mixed configuration. They're moving to intercept the Titan's glory at the quantum crystal site. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the raiders' approach vectors and formation spacing. 3 weeks of coordinating Blackwater's defenses had taught her to read the patterns of these attacks. The raiders were professional, disciplined, and definitely receiving intelligence about mining operations from somewhere inside the Council's information network. "Time to intercept?" she asked. 14 minutes if we push the engines to redline," replied Korvac, the Centaurian pilot whose mechanical modifications allowed him to interface directly with the ship's navigation systems. But the Glory's escort won't last that long against 6 raiders. The escort was a converted cargo hauler with basic weapons and an inexperienced crew. Good people, but not equipped for serious combat against military-trained opponents. Sarah had been working to improve Blackwater's defense capabilities, but there was only so much that could be accomplished in 3 weeks with limited resources. "Signal the Titan's Glory," Sarah ordered. "Tell them to abandon the mining site and retreat to defensive position, Charlie. We'll cover their withdrawal." "What about the quantum crystals?" Jensen asked. "That deposit is worth more than most of our other sites combined." Sarah understood the concern. Blackwater Station operated on thin margins, and the loss of a major deposit could seriously impact their ability to maintain operations. But she had learned long ago that equipment could be replaced while good people could not. "Crystals don't fight back when raiders try to kill them," she said. "The Glory's crew does. Make the signal." The Iron Duchess accelerated toward the engagement zone, her modified engines pushing the ship well beyond the performance envelope of a standard mining vessel. Around Sarah, the bridge crew worked with the efficient coordination that had developed over weeks of combat operations. They were no longer a collection of miners playing at being soldiers. They had become a real fighting unit. "Incoming transmission from the Raider formation," reported Chen, an aquatic communications specialist whose water-filled console allowed her to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously. "Standard surrender demand. They're offering safe passage in exchange for cargo and mining equipment." "Response?" Jensen asked. Sarah's smile was cold and predatory. "Tell them we'll consider their offer right after they demonstrate the sincerity of their peaceful intentions by disarming their weapons and submitting to escort to Blackwater Station for negotiations." The young technician looked uncertain. "Should I really send that?" "Word for word," Sarah confirmed. "Let's see how they react to a little psychological warfare." The Raider response was predictable. Weapons fire directed at the Titan's Glory, whose escort ship was already taking heavy damage. But the Raiders' tactical formation showed subtle changes that suggested Sarah's message had found its mark. They were bunching together slightly, showing signs of uncertainty about what they were really facing. "All ships, this is Iron Duchess," Sarah broadcast on an open frequency. "Raiders in the AO, you are interfering with legitimate mining operations in independent space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." "They're responding," Chen reported. "Audio only." The voice that came through the speakers was electronically distorted, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty beneath the attempted intimidation. "Unknown vessel. This is a lawful salvage operation authorized by Galactic Council mining regulations. Withdraw or we will consider you hostile." Sarah almost laughed. The Raiders were claiming Council authority for their attacks on independent operations in the void. It was a transparent lie, but it revealed something important about who was backing them. "Iron Duchess to Raider formation," she replied. "Please transmit your Council authorization codes for verification. We'll be happy to verify your legitimacy with Blackwater Station's legal department." The pause that followed was telling. The Raiders didn't have authorization codes because the Council would never officially sanction attacks on independent mining operations. But the fact that they had tried to claim Council authority suggested they were operating with unofficial backing from someone in the galactic government. "Forget the authorization," the Raider leader finally responded. "You're outnumbered 6-1. Stand down and we'll let you live." The Iron Duchess reached weapons range just as the Raiders opened fire on the Titan's Glory. Sarah's ship was built for a different kind of fight than her opponents expected. Where they had speed and numbers, she had firepower and tactical surprise. "Target the lead ship," Sarah ordered. "Full spread, plasma torpedoes." The modified mining ship revealed her true nature as hidden weapon ports opened and military-grade ordnance streaked toward the Raiders. The lead attacker, a sleek Vorthan-designed interceptor, disappeared in a brilliant explosion as the plasma torpedoes overwhelmed its shields. 5 targets remaining, Jensen reported, his voice tight with combat adrenaline. "They're scattering, trying to flank us." They're fast, but we're smarter, Sarah said calmly. Korvac, give me a spiral pattern. Keep us moving. Chen, signal the other defense ships. Tell them we have raiders engaged at Site 7. The Iron Duchess danced through space with surprising grace for such a large vessel. Her modified engines and enhanced maneuvering thrusters allowed combat tactics that no conventional mining ship could match. Sarah had spent weeks training with Korvac to develop these maneuvers, turning the ship's apparent weaknesses into tactical advantages. 2 more raiders closed from different angles, their weapons targeting the Iron Duchess's engines and life support systems. But Sarah had anticipated this approach, having seen it used in previous attacks on mining operations. Emergency stop, she ordered. All reverse thrusters full power. The sudden deceleration caught the attacking raiders by surprise. Their weapons fire passed harmlessly through the space where the Iron Duchess had been moments before, while Sarah's ship brought her main guns to bear on both attackers. Fire as they bear, she commanded. The Iron Duchess's forward batteries spoke with the voice of concentrated energy, sending streams of particle beams toward the raiders who had expected to be attacking her stern. One of the attackers, a modified civilian freighter, took critical damage to its power systems and began drifting helplessly. The other managed to avoid the worst of the barrage, but not without taking serious damage to its weapons and shields. 3 targets remaining, Jensen reported. The damaged one is trying to withdraw. The other 2 are regrouping for another attack run. Signal the withdrawal ship, Sarah ordered. Tell them they have 10 minutes to clear the area before we consider them hostile again. Their choice, it was a calculated risk, but one that might provide useful intelligence. If the raiders were part of a larger organization, the surviving ship might lead Blackwater's forces to their base of operations. And if they were simply mercenaries, word might spread that attacking independent mining operations was becoming an expensive proposition. The remaining 2 raiders approached more cautiously, having learned respect for the Iron Duchess's capabilities. But caution worked against them in this situation. The longer the engagement lasted, the more likely it became that other Blackwater defense ships would arrive to reinforce Sarah's position. Multiple contacts incoming, Chen announced. 3 ships on approach vectors, broadcasting Blackwater identification codes. The cavalry had arrived. Elena Vasquez had been building Blackwater's defense network carefully, positioning armed ships throughout the mining sites to provide mutual support when attacks occurred. The raiders were now facing 4 armed vessels instead of the easy target they had expected. All Blackwater ships, this is Iron Duchess, Sarah broadcast. 2 raiders remaining, both damaged. Form up for coordinated attack Pattern Delta. Pattern Delta was one of the tactical formations Sarah had developed for Blackwater's defense forces. It took advantage of the different capabilities of their various ships, using the faster vessels to herd enemies toward the heavier units while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. The raiders made their choice quickly. Faced with overwhelming odds and the loss of tactical surprise, they broke off the engagement and fled toward the edge of the system. Sarah watched them go, resisting the impulse to pursue. Victory in this engagement was measured by the successful defense of the mining operation, not by the total destruction of the enemy. Iron Duchess to all ships, she announced. Stand down from combat alert. Damage reports and casualty assessments, please. The responses came in quickly. Minor damage to the escort ship. No casualties among the mining crews. Another successful defense of Blackwater's operations. But Sarah knew this was just one engagement in a larger war. Someone was funding these raids, providing intelligence and coordination for attacks on independent operations throughout the void. The raiders were becoming more sophisticated and better equipped with each attack. Sooner or later, Blackwater would face an assault that couldn't be repelled by clever tactics and modified mining ships. But today was not that day. Today, they had proven once again that freedom was worth fighting for, and that those who chose to stand together could defend what they had built against those who would take it from them. The real question was whether the Council would continue to pretend ignorance of what was happening in the void, or whether they would finally reveal their true involvement in the escalating conflict. The emergency session in Blackwater Station's command center had been running for 6 hours, and tempers were beginning to fray. Sarah studied the holographic display showing recent raider activity across the void, noting the increasing frequency and sophistication of attacks. What had started as opportunistic piracy was evolving into systematic warfare. 17 mining sites hit in the past 2 weeks, Elena reported, her voice showing the strain of constant crisis management. "We're losing equipment faster than we can replace it, and the crews are getting nervous. 3 teams have already requested transfers to safer operations." Captain Torak leaned back in his chair, cybernetic implants whirring as he processed the tactical data. "The raiders are learning from each engagement. They're adapting to our defensive patterns, bringing heavier weapons using better coordination." Sarah nodded grimly. "Someone's providing them with real-time intelligence about our operations. They know which sites are most valuable, which ships are escorting them, and what defensive measures we have in place." The implications were uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Blackwater Station prided itself on being a haven for independent operators, but that same openness made it vulnerable to infiltration. With hundreds of ships coming and going each week, and crew members from dozens of different species, identifying a spy was nearly impossible. "There's more," said Dr. Kim, the station's chief communications officer. "I've been monitoring Council frequency transmissions, and there's been a significant increase in encrypted traffic between the administrative complex and Vorthon military frequencies. The timing correlates perfectly with the raider attacks." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Everyone had suspected Council involvement, but concrete evidence was another matter entirely. If the galactic government was actively supporting attacks on independent operations, it meant the conflict was about to escalate far beyond simple piracy. Jensen, who had been monitoring sensor networks throughout the conversation, suddenly straightened at his console. "Commander Chen, we've got a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting a large formation approaching from the direction of Council space. Multiple capital ships, escort vessels, and what looks like a full assault group." Sarah moved to the tactical display, studying the sensor readings with growing concern. The approaching force was too large and too well coordinated to be another raider attack. This was a military operation, planned and executed by professionals with significant resources. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. "At current speed, approximately 8 hours, Jensen replied. "But Commander, the lead ship's signature matches a Council peacekeeping dreadnought." "They're not hiding their identity." Elena stood abruptly, her face pale with realization. "They're coming for you, aren't they?" The Council finally decided to stop playing games and deal with their fugitive problem directly. Sarah had been expecting this moment since the day she fled Council jurisdiction. Her defiance had been a public embarrassment that the galactic government couldn't ignore indefinitely. But bringing a full military task force to arrest one fugitive seemed excessive, even for the Council's bureaucratic mindset. "There's something else," Dr. Kim said, studying her communication intercepts. "I'm detecting transmissions to several other independent stations throughout the void. The Council isn't just coming for Blackwater. They're moving against every major independent operation simultaneously." The scope of the operation became clear to Sarah in that moment. This wasn't about arresting a fugitive or even stopping raider attacks. The Council was using her presence at Blackwater as justification for a complete military occupation of the void. They were finally making their move to eliminate independent operations and secure total control over the galaxy's rare mineral resources. "How many ships do we have available for defense?" Sarah asked. Elena consulted her personnel files. 43 vessels currently docked, another dozen on patrol or mining duty. Most are modified civilian ships with light weapons. Against a Council task force, "We'll be slaughtered," Torak finished bluntly. "Council dreadnoughts carry enough firepower to crack planets. Our little mining ships won't even scratch their paint." Sarah studied the tactical situation, looking for any advantage they might exploit. The void was vast, with thousands of asteroids and debris fields that could provide cover. Blackwater's ships were smaller and more maneuverable than Council vessels, built for operations in cluttered space rather than open battle. "We can't fight them head-on," she said finally, "but we might not have to. The Council task force is designed for conventional warfare against organized opposition. They're not prepared for guerrilla tactics in asteroid fields." "You're talking about abandoning the station," Elena said quietly. It was the hardest decision Sarah had made since leaving Council jurisdiction. Blackwater Station represented everything she had come to value about independent civilization: freedom, cooperation, and the courage to build something worthwhile in dangerous circumstances. But sometimes strategic withdrawal was the only way to preserve what mattered most. "Not abandoning," she corrected. "Relocating. The station is modular, designed to be moved when mining opportunities shift. We evacuate the civilian population, disperse the mining fleet, and establish new bases deeper in the void where the Council can't follow. The logistics alone would be a nightmare, Torak protested, moving an entire station's worth of equipment and personnel, establishing new supply lines, finding suitable locations. Better than the alternative, Sarah replied. If we stay and fight, we lose everything. If we disperse and survive, we can rebuild somewhere else. Elena was already pulling up station schematics on the holographic display. It could work. The main habitat modules can be detached and moved independently. The manufacturing facilities are designed for modular transportation. We'd lose some infrastructure, but the core of our operation could survive. What about the people who can't or won't leave? Jensen asked. Not everyone here is cut out for life as a fugitive. Sarah had considered this problem as well. Blackwater's population included families, elderly individuals, and species that required specialized environmental support. Not all of them could adapt to the uncertain existence of a mobile community, operating beyond Council authority. Anyone who wants to leave can take passage on outbound ships before the Council arrives, she said. No questions asked, no pressure to stay. But those who choose to remain will need to understand what they're committing to. Dr. Kim looked up from her communications console. I'm receiving surrender demands from the Council Task Force. They're offering amnesty for all station personnel except... She paused, looking directly at Sarah. Except for Commander Sarah Chen, who is to be turned over for transport to face charges of desertion and treason. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood the choice they were being asked to make. They could surrender Sarah and probably preserve their way of life, at least temporarily. Or they could stand with her and face the consequences of defying the galactic government. Well, Elena said finally, I guess that settles it. No one here signed up to hand over our friends to Council interrogators. Murmurs of agreement came from around the room. These were people who had already chosen independence over security, who had built their lives on the principle that some things were worth fighting for. They weren't about to abandon those principles now. 6 hours to implement evacuation procedures, Sarah said, taking command of the situation. Priority 1 is civilian evacuation. Get the families and non-essential personnel on outbound ships immediately. Priority 2 is equipment preservation. Strip anything valuable that can be moved quickly. What about you? Torak asked. The Council is coming specifically for you. Maybe if you left, Sarah shook her head. They're not just coming for me anymore. This is about eliminating independent operations throughout the void. If I run, they'll still occupy Blackwater and shut down everything you've built here. At least this way, we all go down fighting. Elena stood and extended her hand. Then we better get started. Welcome to the Resistance, Commander Chen. As Sarah shook Elena's hand, she felt the weight of history settling around them. What had started as one woman's refusal to accept, reassignment was becoming something much larger. A genuine challenge to the Council's authority that could reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The next few hours would determine whether that challenge would survive its first real test. The evacuation of Blackwater Station proceeded with the desperate efficiency of people who knew their lives depended on speed and precision. Sarah watched from the command center as dozens of ships launched from the docking bays, carrying families and non-essential personnel to safety in the outer reaches of the void. 3 hours had passed since the Council ultimatum, leaving less than 5 hours before the task force arrived. The station's population had dropped from nearly 10,000 to fewer than 2,000 volunteers who had chosen to stay and fight rather than abandon everything they had built. Last, civilian transport is away, Elena reported, monitoring the evacuation from her position at the command console. All remaining personnel are either essential operations staff or volunteers for the Resistance. Sarah studied the tactical displays showing the positioning of their remaining ships. 41 vessels of various sizes and capabilities, from single-person mining pods to heavy cargo haulers converted for combat. Against a Council task force that included dreadnoughts and escort cruisers, the numbers were laughably inadequate. But numbers weren't everything in warfare. Sarah had learned that lesson during her years with the Terran Defense Force, where human forces had often faced superior alien technology and larger fleets. Victory went to those who could adapt, improvise, and fight smarter rather than harder. Status on the mobile operations plan? She asked. Torak looked up from a console displaying engineering schematics. 70% of critical infrastructure is ready for transport. The main habitat modules have been detached and loaded onto heavy haulers. Manufacturing equipment is being distributed among cargo ships. We'll lose some efficiency, but the core of our operation will survive. What about the quantum crystal processing facility? That's the problem, Elena admitted. The processing equipment is too large and delicate to move quickly. If we leave it behind, the Council gets control of our most valuable technology. Sarah considered the options. The quantum crystal processing facility was what made Blackwater Station truly independent. It allowed them to refine raw materials into finished products without relying on Council-controlled manufacturing centers. Losing it would force any surviving resistance operations to depend on external suppliers, most of whom were ultimately subject to Council authority. How long to dismantle it safely? She asked. 12 hours minimum, replied Jensen, who had been coordinating with the engineering teams. Maybe 8 if we accept the risk of equipment damage. 8 hours. The Council task force would arrive in less than 5. Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices that had defined her military career. Situations where every option carried unacceptable costs, and leadership meant choosing which price to pay. What if we don't dismantle it? She said slowly. What if we destroy it instead? The suggestion drew shocked looks from everyone in the command center. The quantum crystal facility represented years of work and enormous investment. It was the foundation of Blackwater's economic independence and technological advancement. You're talking about destroying our most valuable asset, Elena said. Without that facility, we'd be just another collection of scavengers picking through cosmic debris. Better to be free scavengers than prosperous slaves, Sarah replied. If the Council gets that technology, they'll use it to strengthen their monopoly on quantum crystal processing. Every independent operation in the galaxy will suffer. She turned to address everyone in the command center. The processing facility is what brought the Council here in the first place. They're not just coming to arrest me. They want to seize the most advanced quantum crystal technology outside of Council space. We can't let them have it. Dr. Kim looked up from her communications console with an expression of grim satisfaction. I've been monitoring Council transmissions and Commander Chen is right. Half their encrypted traffic is about securing the processing facility intact. They're planning to establish a permanent base here specifically to exploit our technology. The confirmation settled the matter. The quantum crystal facility would have to be destroyed, along with any other technology that might benefit the Council's war against independent operations. It was a painful decision, but one that would deny their enemies a strategic victory even in defeat. Implement scorched earth protocols, Sarah ordered. Destroy anything that can't be moved and might be useful to the Council. Focus on the processing facility, the advanced sensor arrays, and the weapons manufacturing equipment. As the station's personnel began implementing the destruction orders, Sarah turned her attention to the tactical challenge of the approaching battle. Even if they couldn't win, they could make the Council's victory as costly as possible. What's the latest intelligence on the task force composition? She asked Jensen. 1 peacekeeping dreadnought, 4 heavy cruisers, 8 escort destroyers, and approximately 20 support vessels, he replied. Total crew complement estimated at 15,000 personnel. Sarah smiled grimly. They're expecting to fight a conventional engagement against a fixed target. Time to show them how wrong they are. She began outlining her battle plan to the assembled commanders. Instead of trying to defend the station directly, they would use it as bait while their ships positioned themselves throughout the surrounding asteroid field. When the Council forces moved in to occupy Blackwater, they would find themselves scattered among thousands of potential hiding places where smaller, more maneuverable ships held every advantage. The key is to avoid direct confrontation, Sarah explained. Hit-and-run attacks targeting their support vessels and communications equipment. Make them fight our kind of war instead of theirs. Captain Morrison, a grizzled human veteran who commanded one of the heavy haulers, raised a concerned hand. What about the dreadnought? Those things carry enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. Dreadnoughts are designed for fleet engagements and planetary bombardment, Sarah replied. They're powerful but not agile. In an asteroid field, size becomes a liability rather than an advantage. We use that against them. Elena was studying the tactical displays with the eye of someone who had spent years navigating the dangerous spaces of the void. The Kepler debris field extends for millions of cubic kilometers. If we can draw them deep enough into it, their larger ships will be severely restricted in movement and targeting. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. We make them come to us, then use superior knowledge of the terrain to our advantage. The plan was ambitious and dangerous, requiring precise coordination among dozens of ships whose crews had limited combat experience. But it was their only chance of inflicting enough damage to make the Council think twice about future operations against independent settlements. 2 hours until contact, Jensen announced. All non-essential personnel should be evacuated to the mobile fleet. Sarah looked around the command center one last time. In a few hours, this place would either be a smoking ruin or a Council military base. Either way, the community that had built it would be scattered across the void, fighting for survival in a war they had never asked for. But sometimes the most important battles were the ones nobody wanted to fight. Sometimes standing up for principles mattered more than calculating the odds of victory. And sometimes the only way to preserve what you valued was to risk losing everything in its defense. All right, people, Sarah said, moving toward the exit. Time to show the Council what happens when they underestimate the power of free people who refuse to surrender. The battle for the future of the Void was about to begin. The Council task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler Void. With the terrible majesty of absolute power, the peacekeeping dreadnought Harmony's voice led the formation, its massive hull bristling with weapons designed to end planetary conflicts with overwhelming force. Behind it came the heavy cruisers and escort destroyers, their formations perfect and their intentions unmistakable. Sarah watched their approach from the bridge of the Iron Duchess, now hidden deep within the asteroid field that surrounded Blackwater Station. Around her, 40 other ships waited in carefully chosen positions, their crews silent and tense as they prepared for what might be their final battle. Council fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies, reported Chen from her communication station. Standard occupation protocol. They're demanding immediate surrender and transfer of all personnel to designated assembly areas. Let them talk, Sarah replied, studying the tactical display that showed the enemy formation's approach. They'll figure out soon enough that nobody's listening. The Harmony's voice moved with the ponderous certainty of a glacier, its sensors sweeping the area around Blackwater Station for signs of defensive preparations. What they found was an apparently abandoned facility, with minimal energy signatures and no active weapon systems. They're taking the bait, Elena observed from her position aboard the command ship Defiance. All Council vessels are moving into close proximity of the station. Sarah watched the enemy formation spread out to surround Blackwater, exactly as she had hoped. The Council commanders were following standard occupation procedures, designed for dealing with conventional opponents who would either surrender or mount a traditional defense. They had no experience with guerrilla tactics in asteroid fields. Iron Duchess to all resistance ships, Sarah broadcast on encrypted channels. Initiate Phase 1. Target support vessels only. Avoid the heavy combatants until they're isolated. The asteroid field erupted into controlled chaos as dozens of hidden ships emerged from concealment. Mining vessels equipped with plasma cutters became impromptu gunships, cargo haulers converted into missile platforms. Single-person mining pods transformed into deadly swarm fighters that could dart between asteroids, too quickly for capital ship targeting systems to track. The first casualties were 3 Council supply ships that had been approaching Blackwater's docking facilities. Caught completely by surprise, they were destroyed before they could raise shields or return fire. The attack sent shockwaves through the Council formation as commanders realized they were facing an organized resistance rather than random piracy. Multiple contacts throughout the asteroid field, the Council fleet. Commander's voice crackled across intercepted communications. All ships, implement defensive formation Delta. Prepare for extended engagement. But defensive formations designed for open space combat were useless in the cluttered environment of the Kepler debris field. As the Council ships tried to regroup, they found themselves separated by massive asteroids and unable to provide mutual support. The resistance forces used this confusion to maximum advantage. Captain Morrison's heavy hauler, Stubborn Mule, emerged from behind a kilometer-wide asteroid and launched a full spread of improvised missiles at the escort, Destroyer Righteous Fury. The missiles were nothing, more than mining charges with guidance systems, but they overwhelmed the destroyer's point defense systems through sheer numbers. The Council ship suffered critical damage to its engines and began drifting helplessly through the asteroid field. Council destroyer disabled, Jensen reported with barely contained excitement. Stubborn mule is withdrawing to secondary position. The pattern repeated throughout the battlefield as resistance ships used hit-and-run tactics to whittle down the Council forces. They would emerge from concealment, attack isolated targets, then disappear back into the maze of asteroids before the enemy could respond effectively. But the Council forces were learning to adapt. The heavy cruiser Divine Purpose began using its massive weapons to clear sections of the asteroid field, creating open space where the resistance ships couldn't hide. Other Council vessels started working in pairs, providing mutual cover as they systematically searched for hidden opponents. They're getting smarter, Elena warned over the communications network. We need to move to Phase 2 before they figure out our patterns. Phase 2 was the most dangerous part of Sarah's plan. Instead of avoiding the Council's heavy ships, they would deliberately provoke them into pursuit deeper into the asteroid field, where their size would become a fatal liability. Iron Duchess to all ships, Sarah broadcast. Commence Operation Matador. Make them angry enough to chase us. The Iron Duchess emerged from concealment directly in front of the Harmony's voice, her weapons targeting the Dreadnought's sensor arrays and communications equipment. The massive ship's shields absorbed the damage easily, but the psychological impact was enormous. No one had dared to attack a Council dreadnought directly in over 50 years. Unknown vessel, you are ordered to surrender immediately, came the outraged response from the Harmony's voice. Continued. Resistance will result in your complete destruction. Sarah's reply was to launch another barrage at the dreadnought's command tower, this time targeting the external communications arrays. The damage was minimal, but the insult was unmistakable. The Harmony's voice responded exactly as Sarah had hoped. Instead of maintaining its position and allowing escort ships to deal with the impudent attacker, the massive dreadnought began moving deeper into the asteroid field in pursuit of the Iron Duchess. Dreadnought is following us into the debris field, Korvac reported from the pilot station. Estimated time to optimal position, 6 minutes. Sarah watched the tactical display as other resistance ships began similar provocations against the Council's heavy cruisers. The strategy was working. The enemy commanders were allowing anger and pride to override tactical judgment, pursuing individual targets instead of maintaining formation integrity. Contact to starboard, Chen announced suddenly. It's the escort destroyer Vigilant Justice moving to intercept our escape route. Sarah studied the sensor readings. The Council destroyer was positioned perfectly to cut off the Iron Duchess's retreat, forcing her into a direct confrontation with superior firepower. But superior firepower meant nothing if it couldn't be brought to bear. Effectively, take us into the graveyard, Sarah ordered. The graveyard was a section of the asteroid field where the remains of ancient stellar collisions had created a maze of metallic debris and gravitational anomalies. Navigation required split-second timing and intimate knowledge of the hazards. It was exactly the kind of environment where smaller, more agile ships held every advantage. The Iron Duchess plunged into the graveyard with the Vigilant Justice in close pursuit. The Council destroyer's captain was skilled and aggressive, keeping pace despite the increasingly dangerous terrain. But skill and aggression weren't enough when physics worked against you. Target the asteroid cluster at bearing 095, Sarah ordered. Full spread, maximum yield. The Iron Duchess's weapons struck a carefully chosen cluster of unstable metallic asteroids, triggering a cascade reaction that sent thousands of fragments spinning through space. The debris cloud was too dispersed to threaten the agile mining ship, but it created an impenetrable barrier for the much larger destroyer. The Vigilant Justice, unable to stop or maneuver quickly enough, plowed directly into the debris field. Its shields collapsed under the constant bombardment of metallic fragments, and hull breaches began venting atmosphere into space. Within minutes, the proud destroyer was a drifting wreck. One down, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. Now for the big fish. The Harmony's voice had followed them deep into the asteroid field, its massive bulk struggling to navigate between obstacles that the Iron Duchess could slip past easily. The Dreadnought's weapons were powerful enough to vaporize any asteroid in their path, but each shot revealed their position to resistance forces throughout the field. Multiple resistance ships converging on the Dreadnought, Jensen reported. They're implementing swarm tactics. Sarah watched as dozens of small vessels emerged from hiding places throughout the asteroid field. attacking the isolated dreadnought from every direction. The massive ship's weapons were devastating but slow to target, designed for destroying large enemy vessels rather than tracking fast-moving fighters. The resistance forces pressed their attack with desperate courage, knowing this might be their only chance to cripple the Council's most powerful ship. Mining pods darted between the dreadnought's weapon turrets, targeting sensor arrays and point defense systems. Converted cargo haulers launched volleys of improvised missiles that overwhelmed the ship's defensive capabilities through sheer volume, but the Harmony's voice was too well defended to be destroyed by such tactics. Its shields held against the swarm attacks, and its secondary weapons began systematically eliminating the smaller resistance ships. The price of victory was becoming too high to sustain. All resistance ships withdraw to Rally Point Alpha, Sarah ordered. Phase 3 is now in effect. Phase 3 was the final gambit, the complete destruction of Blackwater Station itself. If the Council wanted the quantum crystal processing facility, they would have to settle for radioactive debris.